Sri Aurobindo is commenting on the Kena Upanishad, where in the first verse, 4 questions have been raised. By whom missioned falls the mind shot to its mark? By whom yoked moves the first life breath forward on its paths? By whom impelled is this word that men speak? What God set eye and ear to their workings? The 4 questions point to 4 powers: the mind, life breath, the creative word, and the eyes and ears and senses by which we perceive. And the question straight away forces us to look behind the appearances. We discussed last time how each of these 4 questions is also a question of science, that modern science is struggling to resolve, to understand, to explain, to answer. And these questions point to something much deeper, which is still beyond the grasp of the modern sciences. And this, in fact, is the intention of the Kena Upanishad in asking these questions. And in the 3rd chapter of Sri Aurobindo's commentary that we are reading, Sri Aurobindo says, the eternal question has been put, which turns man's eyes away from the visible and the outward to that which is utterly within, away from the little known that he has become to the vast unknown he is behind these surfaces, and must yet grow into and be, because that is his reality. And out of all masquerade of phenomenon and becoming, the real being must eventually deliver itself. So all 4 questions are really forcing us to look beyond this visible and the little known of our world experience and our sense of identity to something which is utterly within, much vaster but unknown, which is the answer to these questions. And in what way is it an answer? Not only we know that that is the one who missions the mind, the source of the creative word, the true life breath, and so on. It is not only these things, it transcends these things and is master of these things. That, therefore, utilizes these things to express itself, to manifest itself. And we are now suddenly put in relation with that reality, capital R, the Brahman. And then Sri Aurobindo says, once the human soul is seized by this compelling direction, he can no longer be satisfied with mere appearances. And this is where we are. So the Kena Upanishad is trying to turn the eyes of the man, not yet fully awakened, to something which, once he glimpses, he will seek for it and not be satisfied with his current superficial life. But the transition is not easy, because in this world we already possess something, although it's not perfect, although it is not secure, still we value what we have. And Sri Aurobindo points out, if we have to abandon what we have to gain something else, then that must be a far more powerful attraction. It must offer something which obviously includes all this which we have, and yet is much greater, And so the Kena actually points to that not in an abstraction. It doesn't say, oh, there is an absolute which has nothing to do with the world. It says that these very things which we value are a shadow expression of that which is more complete. And if we seek satisfaction in these things, that will be enormously greater satisfaction. Or more profoundly, if we seek satisfaction, it means we have not yet found satisfaction in what we have. And we may hope that if we pursue long enough, we will find that satisfaction. But history records, and we need only look back the last few thousand years, that after all the questings of all these thousands of years by billions of people, no one has really got it. I thought that if I eat more, my desire for food will be satisfied. But after all the food I have eaten across all the lives, and after all the millions of people who have eaten their food, no one can say I am now fully satisfied with the food or for anything else in life. So it means when we are seeking satisfaction, it means we have not found it, and the evidence is that we cannot find it. And that which is the source of these satisfactions is in fact the fulfillment of them all. This is the point to which the Kena Upanishad is leading us. And the result is, while I can say all this which I have in my life, I cherish, I cling to, it's extremely valuable, I don't want to let go or lose, I am being shown that precisely what I am valuing is to be found there in this higher reality, of which my current experience is a fragmented, shadow, partial, struggling reflection. So, what is offered when we turn towards that? And Sri Aurobindo says, these are texts we have already read. This is offered not an enlarged becoming, but infinite being. You're not struggling anymore to become more and more and more. Recently, I read somewhere somebody giving advice to people. I don't remember the exact words, but it went something like give more, enjoy more, be more happy, give more love, be more of this, more of that, and then you'll be satisfied. And that's the illusion we have that somehow more will be better. And you can keep on enlarging more, more, more. And the fact is, you're still not satisfied because there is more possible. So, what is offered is not enlarged becoming, but infinite being. There is no enlarging needed. You are it all in one go. The struggle ends. You have it completely, not partially. So, he gives four descriptions. Not an enlarged becoming, but but infinite being. Not always relative piecings of knowledge mistaken in their hour for the whole of knowledge, but possession of our essential consciousness and the flood of its luminous realities. And it is the same problem we are facing in wanting to know. I want to be larger, that's one story. I want to know more. I want to know more correctly, more completely, without error, more precisely, and so on. And again, there is this unending growth of pieces, pieces which we join and somehow they don't fit. We rejoin, we rearrange, and science continues to reconstruct itself. But instead of that, what is offered? Possession of our essential consciousness and the flood of its luminous realities. And all knowledge is in that oceanic flood of light. It is, you are one with it. There is no struggling and striving anymore. And the third, not partial satisfactions, but the delight. What do we seek truly behind all that we are seeking? We're seeking because something in us is restless. we feel that by seeking this, fulfilling this, the restlessness will stop, or in other words, we will have satisfaction. The problem is, even when we do have satisfaction, my stomach is full, I have eaten all that I could, the satisfaction is temporary and it is partial. So there are those who say, I wish I had 5 stomachs and 5 mouths, then I could have eaten 5 times more with 5 times greater satisfaction. Or I wish satisfaction could last permanently, because whenever we have satisfactions, inevitably it fades. And then in contrast, the period after the satisfaction is more dissatisfying because we have tasted some satisfaction. And now when we regain the same satisfaction, it is no more as satisfying because we already had it. There's nothing new left. Now we need something more satisfying. So these are all partial satisfactions. Instead, what is offered when we turn to the higher is the delight. In other words, something in us feels that satisfaction is possible, or it feels satisfied because in the satisfaction is this sense of delight, but a fragmented delight, a peace, temporary. It fades as soon as you grasp it. There is behind in that greater reality the delight which is. And it is not a flat monotone, it is unending revelation, constantly new. An entire ocean bursting out in layers and layers and waves after waves, unendingly. Such is the nature of that delight. Always satisfying, but moving always to something new and fresh, even as it is complete. And these three are summarized in a single word, in a word, immortality, capital I. Now, this word immortality is not about permanence of the body or freedom from the physical death. It is, as we have seen before, the consciousness of Sat Chit Ananda, which has just been described here as infinite being and essential consciousness and flood of luminosities and the delight, Sat Chit and Ananda. That is immortality, which the Upanishads are pointing to, and which is their aim of realization. And this immortality is not something beyond against which this world is dissolved. It is the origin of this and the fulfillment of this. This world is an expression of that, but a partial expression of that. So again, Sri Aurobindo says, and this is the last sentence which we had studied, here we live in an organization of mortal consciousness, which takes the form of a transient world. There, we are liberated into the harmonies of an infinite self-seeing, which knows all world in the light of the eternal and immortal. So this organization of our material mortal consciousness is the experience of a world which is constantly in change. And if you think about it, there is nothing in this world which you can say, I want to hold this permanently, I can keep this forever. There is nothing which you can say is complete. There is nothing which you can say is perfect. There is nothing which you can say is fully known. So this the world has a peculiarity. It is a form of a transient world. But there we are not only not bound in the narrowness of our body and the instability and precariousness of our life. We are first of all liberated into the harmonies of an infinite consciousness. But that consciousness is all-seeing and knows all world in the light of the eternal and immortal. Everything is seen in the backdrop of eternity, immortality, permanence, completeness, fullness, no limitation. There may still be change of form. There may be expression of form unfolding, but the form itself is a vehicle to express shades, facets, or variations of eternity. What's the relationship between these two? This domain which we are currently aware of, and that domain which we are not aware of. I'm deliberately not using the word we are living in, because the fact is we are living in both. We are only aware of this domain, we are not aware of that domain. We do enter into that domain at times in conditions of deep sleep or deep meditation, where a part of our consciousness goes into those domains and returns, but we have no memory of it. Even if we tried to remember, in the return we would lose that memory because we are not aware of those parts of ourselves. So, although we live in both these domains, we are only aware of this. What is the relationship of that domain with this then? He says, the beyond is our reality. That is our plenitude. That is the absolute satisfaction of our self existence. It is immortality and it is that delight which the Upanishad points to. Sri Aurobindo contrasts this now with the current experience of our life in the next paragraph, which we now take up. He says, here in our imprisoned mentality, the ego strives to be master and possessor of its inner field and its outer environment, yet cannot hold anything to enjoy it, because it is not possible really to possess what is not self to us. First of all, we are a little piece, small ego. Our mentality is imprisoned, bound. Now, what this means really is very difficult to convey because we have lost the memory of the freedom. If a man was imprisoned at a very early age in a dungeon and shut off from all light, and after many decades, he has forgotten what it's like to be free, to be in open air, to be in wide spaces, or even to see light. And you tell him, there is something called light, and when that happens, you can see. And the question he will ask is, what is seeing? And what is this light? And what is this wideness? I only know that my body can move a little bit, and that's about it. And this is really the condition of our mind. When we entered the body to take birth, our mind, as in the mental body, which was much wider, freer, and open to universal awareness, it got crushed, squeezed, so to say, compressed, and dulled into the body consciousness. And it is that in which we woke up as children, as babies. And from the point where the brain continued to form in the child's body, all the memories we have acquired of this world and this life, stored in our current surface awareness, are of this limited experience. So there is nothing in our current memory to remind us of what it was like to be in that freer mental awareness. And we're not even speaking of spiritual consciousness here, just the mind. What is that like? We have no idea. Except because our mind is still made of that, there is a distant sense of something forgotten. Not a conscious surface memory, but a sense of something forgotten. And that acts like a goad, compelling the surface mind to go a little more and a little more, to want more, to be free, to have real knowledge. There are beautiful descriptions of people who have perhaps experienced going out of the body, or who have had what we call near death experiences, when for a while, for a few minutes, they were thrown out of the physical body, they were free of its limitations, and briefly experienced that domain and then came back. And you will see whenever they start speaking of that, their eyes light up, their face glows. I recall reading and seeing an interview where somebody said, I felt as if I was everywhere, all over the world at the same time, except I was more connected with this body, but I was everywhere at the same time equally. That kind of experience is actually normal to our mental consciousness, but here somehow we experienced we experience our imprisoned mentality. And in this imprisoned mentality, the ego sense, the part which says, oh, I am this person, it strives to be master and possessor. Sometimes people say, when they ask you, how are things? They will ask, so is everything under control? And implied is the idea that you're comfortable, you're happy when everything around you is in control. And you see how that's really our sense of security. When things move in a way that we cannot control them, we feel insecure. Will this dog suddenly leap at me and bite me? Except it's not the dog, it is your money in the bank, or it is your properties which you own, which somebody might tomorrow grab, or it is the investments in the stock market which might collapse, or whatever it is. Something out there which you cannot control, which you cannot overcome. If it were to overwhelm you, you would lose, you would be reduced, you would cease to be. You would become its slave. That is the fear implied. So the struggle of the ego sense is to be master and possessor of what? Inner field and outer environment. Obviously, we start more easily with the outer environment to subjugate the world somehow to our needs. And we create. I know that I cannot control what happens in another person's house, but in my house, in my territory, in my little room, I try to keep things under my control. But eventually, I realize that I myself am not in my control. And so there is a need also to master and possess the inner fields, my mind, my emotions, my instincts, and so on. So here in our imprisoned mentality, the ego strives to be master and possessor of its inner field and its outer environment. Very briefly stated, but it captures the whole experience of the human life. Yet cannot hold anything to enjoy it, because it is not possible really to possess what is not self to us. And again, he is going straight to the heart of the human problem. After all our efforts, we cannot possess, we cannot hold anything to enjoy it. It's brief, it passes, it slips through our fingers. Why? And the core problem is we cannot enjoy because it is not possible to possess what is not self to us. So if you look at it in this way, you realize you can only possess what is you. If it's not you, it's separate from you, eventually it can be taken away, will be taken away because it can be. The only thing which you truly possess is what is yourself. The not self cannot be possessed. So the conclusion is this. In this universe, as this imprisoned mentality and ego person, I cannot possess anything in the world except transitorily, temporarily, partially. And that's why this life, as it is with the ego imprisoned mentality, is doomed to dissatisfaction. But, Sri Aurobindo says, but there, in the freedom of the eternal, our self existence possesses without strife by the sufficient fact that all things are itself. So, in that consciousness, where we are already, there is the freedom of the eternal. Our self existence possesses all things because they are itself. Our consciousness being now complete, one with all things, automatically we possess because all is us without strife. Here, the strife is because everything we want to possess is not us. So there's always a reaching out, a grabbing, pulling, insecurity, and somebody else grabs and pulls, and there's a tug of war. So there is always a strife in any possession here, but there, because all is already one with us, we do not have any strife, and all things are. I go back to that example I gave of the person who described how he felt himself everywhere on earth equally, and all things are therefore happening in him. And the possession is easy because they're already in him. For a person who experiences all things in him, where is the sense of a loss or fear of theft? When something is stolen, let's say it is taken by a thief from my room to his house and his room. So I say I have lost it because it is no more in my room and I suffer. But if his house and his room are equally felt by me as my house and my room, well, I just moved it from my room to another room of another house, which is still part of my mansion. And there's no problem. I'm not worried when I move an object from one room of my house to another room of my house. I don't feel a loss. And it is in this kind of a consciousness that the universal person lives. Something comes, he enjoys the interchange with it as it comes. When it goes, he enjoys the interchange with it as it goes. If it goes to another house, he enjoys the fact that it is in another house. There is nowhere any insecurity, nowhere a fear of loss, and nowhere a loss of satisfaction. They are just different colors of different experience of satisfaction. So, there, in the freedom of the eternal, our self existence possesses without strife by the sufficient fact that all things are itself. In this state, also, there is the freedom of the consciousness in eternity. Here, in the apparent man, here is the apparent man, there the real man, the Purusha. So now when we compare these two statuses and we say we are in both statuses, which is really you? Obviously this is me, but also that is me, although I don't have a awareness of it from here. But he says that's the real man. Here is the apparent man, because this is a piece of reflection, a projection of that. That is not a creation of this. This is a creation of that. Here are the gods. Here are gods. There is the divine. So again, the difference in terms of a higher consciousness, also in terms of the inner domains of reality, the gods also belong to the domain of divided energies. The divine is in the unity from which the gods are an expression. Here is the attempt to exist, life flowering out of an all devouring death. There, existence itself and a dateless immortality. So, the nature of this struggle here is life pushing itself out, death chasing it, trying to eat it up, and somehow out of this all devouring death, life manages not only to escape but to flower out. The image is very suggestive. Matter here is the all devouring death. Because in matter, everything is being somehow pulled back, worn out, broken down, reabsorbed, and continuously changed in form. So, in the domain of material form, form has to break down and change, therefore, death. And everything, all is devoured. Out of that changing material substance, somehow life manages to push itself out. Momentarily, in the flowering, is a form made of matter which is living. and then the form has to break down. Life continues, though. Life has not died. Life continues to build a new form and a new form. That's the struggle of this world. There, existence, capital E, all is simply, and immortality. And it is not even an immortality which began one day and ends, it is dateless. This question is often asked in discussing the universe. We say there was a big bang by which the universe was created. That is one theory. It is nothing proved still. But the question is asked, what is before the big bang? From where did the big bang come? And when you think about the idea of the world starting sometime and ending sometime, the moment you put a start and an end, you can also conceive of a beyond. Before the start and after the end. That is this immortal, self existent, dateless consciousness, existence. So, here is the attempt to exist, life flowering out of an all devouring death. There, existence itself and a dateless immortality. So, all of this came from that first question, which is meant to turn our eyes away from the surface appearance to that which is behind. Kena, by whom is this done? Who is the God behind all this? And now Sri Aurobindo says, the answer that is thus given is involved in the very form of the original question. The truth behind mind, life, sense must be that which controls by exceeding it. So the question was asked, you see the wording is very subtle. By whom missioned falls the mind shot to its mark? Keneshitam patati preshitam manaha. By whom yoked moves the first life breath forward on its paths? By whom impelled is this word that men speak? So the point that is asked in the question is, who is the controller? By whom missioned the mind falls? Who gave the mission? Who gave the direction and purpose? The first life breath was yoked, controlled, and directed by whom? The word that is spoken is impelled by whom? So the clear suggestion is that the control is behind. That has the control. So Sri Aurobindo says, in the very wording of the question, we are shown that that controls this. And how? By exceeding it. Because that is greater than this, it can apply its control. It is the Lord, the all-possessing Deva, capital D. Now, Deva here is not in the loose sense of the word which we use to describe the gods, the Devas. Deva, the root sound from Div, comes this idea of illumination, light. The light of consciousness radiating, manifesting. That is Deva. So the divine beings, because they are beings of light, radiating divinity and powers of the divine, therefore we call them Devas. But here this is the one Deva. In the fourth question which is asked, what God yet set eye and ear to their workings? Chakshu Shrotram Ka Udevo Bhunakti. Which Deva? And so this is the one Deva who has set the senses to their working. Now this is the answer to which the question points to. And Sri Aurobindo pauses here to connect the text we are studying with another text which we have studied before of the Isha. And he compares the approach of these two Upanishads. Since we have already studied the Isha, we can now appreciate this better. This was the conclusion at which the Isha Upanishad arrived by the synthesis of all existences. What was the conclusion? That the Lord is the one who presides who controls, who manifests all this world, who enjoys the world itself. Isha, therefore Isha Upanishad, the Lord, that's the focus. This Upanishad is Kena, by whom, and it points to the Lord by asking the question. So the Isha Upanishad arrived by the synthesis of all existences. It showed how all the contraries, all the extremes, when seen together, we recognize the one consciousness which unifies them, synthesizes them, and of which these are manifestations. So by synthesis, it arrived at the Lord. The Kena arrives at it by the antithesis of one governing self-existence to all that this exists, to all this that exists variously by another power of being than its own. So the Kena arrives at the same Lord, but by antithesis. The Isha by synthesis, Kena by antithesis. And we have to understand these relationships. This is a process of philosophy in which you place a thesis, against it the very opposite antithesis, which is justified to be equally true. Otherwise, it's not antithesis. Now, if both contradictory things are shown to be equally true, there has to be greater truth of which these are parts, partial truths. And so there is the synthesis. So the Isha has taken this process of synthesizing the extremes, uniting them in this greater perception of the divine, the Lord. But the Kena arrives at the Lord by antithesis of one governing self-existence to all this that exists variously by another power of being than its own. It shows you the opposition of these two. There is an existence, all this. All this exists, it's true. There is a life force, there is a mind, there are our senses, all this world that we experience, and it's tapping things at the level of the human experience. Nothing that it says is outside the domain of our experiences. We have a mind, we have a life force, we have the creative power of the word, and we have our senses. This is the human life. But in all these four powers by which the human life exists, we notice none of these four are the original powers. They are all operated by a power other than themselves, a power by another power of being than its own. By that, this exists. And what is that? One governing self-existence. So a contrast is made between the two. This multiplicity is governed by oneness. These powers are governed by something other than their own. And so by this contrast, it arrives at the Lord. Each Upanishad, each follows its own method for the resolution of all things into the one reality. So the Isha, you will see, it takes a series of extremes, oppositions, contradictions of the world and unites them to show this presiding reality of the Lord behind. The Kena contrasts our world experience with something behind, which is the true ruler of things. And so by a different method, it still comes to the same conclusion. But the conclusion is identical. It is the all-possessing and all-enjoying who is reached by the renunciation of separate being, separate possession, and separate delight. And you can attain to that one all-possessing, all-enjoying divine consciousness by renunciation of separate being, separate possession, and separate delight. You will recall the Isha had gone through this process. Tena tyaktena bhunjita, by that renounced, thou shouldst enjoy. So renouncing the sense of separate possession. But the same thing happens with the Kena. And we will see those verses once again, just to elucidate. But still there's a difference. And Sri Aurobindo now points to the principal difference of approach between the two Upanishads. And it is only penetrating perception of Sri Aurobindo's genius that places these things with such clarity that when we read it, we say, oh, it's so obvious, it's so simple. But he had to show it to us for us to recognize how simple it is. He says, but the Isha addresses itself to the awakened seeker. It begins, therefore, with the all inhabiting Lord, proceeds to the all becoming self, and returns to the Lord as the self of the cosmic movement. I skip the sentence. The next one he says, the Kena addresses itself to the soul still attracted by the external life, not yet wholly awakened, nor wholly a seeker. It begins, therefore, with the Brahman as the self beyond mind, and proceeds to the Brahman as the hidden Lord of all our mental and vital activities. Because it has to point this soul upward beyond its apparent and outward existence. But the two opening chapters of the Kena only state less widely from this other viewpoint the Isha's doctrine of the self and its becomings. So there are more, the sentences are longer. I have ignored some portions. We will come back to it shortly. But let us now look at it this way. The Isha Upanishad starts with an awakened seeker and says, all this is for the habitation of the Lord. It is revealing to you the vision of the awakened seeker and deepening that vision. The Kena starts with a soul who is still attached to the external world. He is not fully awakened, not yet fully a seeker. And so it begins with Brahman as the self beyond mind. So it has to start with that which we know. It can't say all this is for the habitation of the Lord, because I will say, what is this Lord and how does he inhabit? So instead it says, you have a mind, you're thinking, what is it that directs your thought? You have eyes and you're seeing, what is the sight within by which the seeing is experienced? It's not merely light reflecting on your retina. You have the sense of having seen something. What is it that drives the life force? And so we are forced to see something behind, of which these are an expression. And so we can conceive of that behind as a higher power of this, which we already know. And thus it points to the Brahman, beyond mind, and then points to Brahman as the hidden Lord of all our mental and vital activities. And in the process, it points the soul upwards beyond its outward apparent existence. So it starts with what you know and then points to something behind in a continuity of transition. So now, if we see the verses as they are, after the first verse, the second verse you will see immediately begins to answer the question which have been raised. But now it puts it by this relationship of that behind this. And the second verse goes thus: that which is hearing of our hearing, mind of our mind, speech of our speech, that too is life of our life breath and sight of our sight. The wise are released beyond and they pass from this world and become immortal. So, in seeing that the things we know, the essential power which makes them what we know them to be, is that which is a power that liberates us and gives us the glimpse of immortality. And then that is now described in itself. When you look at that now by itself, not in relation to this world. Verse 3: there sight travels not, nor speech nor mind. Remember, we just saw speech, mind, and sight are all coming from there, getting their powers from there. But when you look at that, sight travels not, nor speech nor mind. You cannot see that, you cannot express that or know that in terms of mind. And yet it is what dynamizes the mind and speech and sight. We know it not, nor can distinguish how one should teach of it. For it is other than the known. It is there above the unknown. It is so we have heard from men of old who declared that to our understanding. So it's here now it describes that by itself, seen from our current senses. The power which drives our mind cannot be known by the mind. If it could be known by the mind, then that power could be a product of the mind. Precisely because that power transcends the mind, it cannot be known by the mind. The true seeing, the power that sees through our sight, cannot be seen by our sight precisely because it exceeds, it transcends, and so on. And so, how does one speak of it? It is other than the known meaning this through our senses and through our mind. But still, there must be a way. Remember, we saw that there's a continuity, and there must be a way, something which bridges, and the way is shown to us through 5 verses, completing the first part. That which is unexpressed by the word, that by which the word is expressed, know that to be Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. Now, each of these 5 is actually a gateway of realizing the Brahman through a concentration, meditation, introspection, self observation, whatever term you use. Beginning with what you are and you already know. If you now trace back, you will get to the Brahman. And the first gateway is the word, the creative word. That which is unexpressed by the word, that by which the word is expressed. Now meditate on this. What is it that is unexpressed by the word? Start with this very simple example. You want to express to somebody when you are deeply moved, intensely grateful, you want to express, and you find however much you say, I cannot thank you enough. Oh, it is so important. It is such a precious gift. It is such a wonderful thing you have done. I'm so relieved. I cannot thank you enough. After all the words you've spoken, there is still something behind you're unable to express. And if you become very quiet and try to catch that, which cannot be expressed, but you're able to feel it and know it in yourself. Or similarly, you have a glimpse of an experience, a perception, an idea, a presence felt. You've been on the mountains, you've felt this vast presence and freedom, and you come back to the city and you say to people, oh, it was so beautiful there. I cannot tell you how beautiful it was. And why can't you tell it? Precisely because there is something experienced and held in that which is cannot be articulated. And try to catch that now. And it's a meditation because you have experienced it, you know it, you're one with it in one point of yourself. And now you need gradually to disengage from all the articulations and get back to that point and feel it. That which is unexpressed by the word, and we have many such experiences, in fact. But there's another side to it, that by which the word is expressed. By what do you get the articulation of the word that you managed to express, although that was not sufficient? And when I say I'm so grateful, the impulse which came to express I am so grateful came from there. So what the Upanishad is pointing to is there is something inarticulable, indescribable, and yet it is the source of what you describe. And there's a continuity. And when you get back to that pure essence, which you could not describe, that's why the sequence is like this. First, you get back to that, and then from there, express. So, first, That which is unexpressed by the word, find that. And second, by which word is expressed. Now articulate yourself from there. And now you manifest that divine truth here in the form. Your word acquires a power of your conviction of the living presence, the living experience which is held in your heart wordlessly. And when a word is spoken from there, it has the power to carry it. Even if the words are insufficient, the vibration comes through those words and they hit. They have an impact. They inspire. They lead another to the same experience. This is the reason why when great spiritual masters speak, sometimes a single word, it has a revelatory, life-changing impact. There are many beautiful stories one could touch upon. If I remember right, there is one story from the life of the Buddha. Or we take simply the closest example we have here of Ramana Maharshi, somebody who has been questing, thinking, meditating, philosophizing, studying, comes to Maharshi and says, ask this question, what about this, why this, how that? And Maharshi simply says, ask yourself who is asking the question. And suddenly the man is pushed back to something much deeper. Similar example, which the detail of which slips my mind, a man who had quested all his life comes to the Buddha and asks him for one single word of liberation, which will lead him to liberation. And the Buddha puts a similar question, I don't remember the exact wording, which makes him suddenly review, stand back, and the man attains to nirvana at that moment. Why? Because the word carried the power of his own experience because it was formulated from there. So implied in this very sequence of the two descriptions, that which is unexpressed by the word, that which the word is by which the word is expressed. In this sequence is implied that the goal is not merely to withdraw into that otherness. The goal is to realize that otherness from which then to articulate through the word. Empower the word by that which is unexpressed by the word. That, know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. So this is the first gateway to realization of the Brahman. The second gateway, verse 5, that which thinks not by the mind, that by which the mind is thought, know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. That which thinks not by the mind. There is something in us, before we can think, something knows, which guides the direction of our thinking. It didn't think by mind, it already knew. And then mind followed in its direction. If you observe yourself and introspect, you will see there is a moment or there's a point or there's a state where even before a thought movement takes place, you know which direction you want the thought to go. And the thought only gives form to that which is already seen and known. That by which the mind is thought. So the power of thinking which guides the mind is precisely this level of knowing, and it's already there in us as a point from which the thought movement originates. But there is, in the very wording in Sanskrit, a double meaning to this. And in the footnote, Sri Aurobindo gives the alternate meaning of this phrase, that which one thinks not with the mind, that by which the mind is thought. So there are two ways of looking at this point. That which thinks not by the mind, something in us or something above, which does not need mind to think. But on the other hand, that which one thinks not with the mind, in other words, what the mind is incapable of thinking of. So you could even take that as a variation of the theme. They both are really facets, complementary ways of looking at the same thing. And when in Sanskrit, especially with the Upanishads, a double meaning is possible, it is intentional, and one has to use both. So the suggestion it gives to the student of the Upanishad is that there are two facets, two different ways of approaching the same thing. For some people, this is more easy. For some people, that is more easy. There are two temperaments among human beings. There are those who would like to observe and watch that part of the mind where I know before I think. There are others who are much more embedded in the mind thinking process and say, what is it that I am unable to think of? And in trying to turn to that, I cast out the mind's activity. I let the mind fall into silence and I turn to that which I am unable to think of, which slips out of the domain of mind. It stands above. And in the silence of my mind, I become aware of it. In either case, once you have glimpsed that, we see now that empowers mind, that by which the mind is thought, because that is there, because that knows, mind can now follow this line of thinking. Know that to be the Brahman and not this which men follow after here. The third gateway, verse 6, that which sees not with the eye, that by which one sees the eyes seeing. Know that to be the Brahman and not this which men follow after here. When we see in the sight, there is an experience of perception which is different from the eye's function. The light from objects comes into my eyes open, perhaps immediately after waking up from sleep or from deep meditation. I look, there's a moment of blurring, I'm not too sure what exactly I'm seeing. Then the power of perception kicks in. Ah, this is what this is, that is what that is. When you wake up from deep sleep sometimes, especially if you have suddenly slept in a new place, you wake up and there's a kind of a disorientation. Where am I? What place is this? You see everything, but you're unable to recognize it. And then the recognition comes. And the recognition had nothing to do with what you were seeing. So you recognize there's something behind which gives meaning to the eye's vision. And you can meditate on that. This is what in artificial intelligence they call the, the problem of the hard question, which is what gives you the sense of self-awareness, which turns a pattern of dots into the experience of an object, a thing itself. That which sees not with the eye, but already it knows what it sees. But there's also the double meaning, and Sri Aurobindo puts it in the footnote, that which one sees not with the eye. In other words, with my eyes, I could look at so many things, but there is something I cannot see with my eyes. What would that be like? So even through my eyes' sight, I can meditate on this idea. What is that which my eyes would be unable to see? It takes many variations, but one way simply is this: the wideness that fills all these forms, the space, the presence that is not the forms and yet supports them, filling them, makes them vivid and real. And somehow the eyes don't see them, and yet the inner perception perceives them, senses them. Or it may be simply you drop away bit by bit all the forms, not this, not this, not this, until there's some kind of a transcending perception, formless, that knows, that sees all forms, but doesn't need eyes to see it. That by which one sees the eye is seeing, because that is there already seeing, knowing holding all forms in potential, it turns to express through the eyes and see through the eyes. Know that to be Brahman and not this which men follow after here. And the same with the hearing, verse 7, that which hears not with the ear, that by which the ear's hearing is heard. Know that to be the Brahman and not this which men follow after here. And again, the footnote gives another variation to that sentence, that which one hears not with the ear. Listen, you can hear all possible sounds, but what is that sound which you cannot hear? The sound of silence. Not even silence, which you can hear. There's a silence behind the silence. And sometimes one glimpses it in deep meditation, like a vibration, but it is not sound. We call it the pranava, the creative vibration, the om, but outside the domain of sound. Or you can concentrate on that which hears not with the ear. All the sounds come, but what is it that already knows without the sounds needing to come to it? By that by which the ear's hearing is heard, that is Brahman. And finally, the verse 8 gives you the fifth gateway, that which breathes not with the breath, that by which the life breath is led forward in its paths. Know that to be the Brahman and not this which men follow after here. What is it that breathes not with the breath? We have these experiences many times when we are working with the body consciousness. Sometimes it happens during half sleep, half waking state, or sometimes in deep meditation, where you can feel as if your whole body is breathing, like a steady pulsation, drawing in life force and breathing out from all directions. Or from some particular part of the body, you can concentrate and experience that it draws life breath and breathes out. And it has nothing to do with the physical breathing. Or sometimes one experiences this at a very physical level. As you approach the samadhi, suddenly your body takes a deep breath and is relieved, relaxed, feels content. And it's as if something, some thirst, some unknown hunger was suddenly satiated or satisfied. It's as if the inner being breathing that atmosphere feels the relief. Ah, at last I have got real nourishment. You enter a sacred space and suddenly you breathe in. What are you breathing? It's not the physical breath, it is something of that sacred vibration you take in. It doesn't take the physical breath, the physical breath follows. So there is something in experience we have of taking in, breathing in, which is not breath, that which breathes not with the breath. And you can hold your physical breath, but still that can be taken in. Or there's a second meaning in the footnote, that which one breathes not, smells not with the breath. So all the breathings you could do will not get to something which is beyond the form that breath can capture. But that, because it is pure life, force, spiritual energy, by that the life breath is led forward in its paths. And so from there, one now guides the life force. Having attained to it, one can re enter the domain of life force and wield it from a greater freedom. And it is thus that many of the great yogis spontaneously are able to wield the life energies and even overcome the physical limitations. Know that to be the Brahman and not this which men follow after here. So, in all these five examples we have taken, we have tried to see how we can use these as gateways to get to know the Brahman. But the point we are connecting to in the Brahman is only a level of transcendence, a first level of transcendence. And although we can say, yes, that is Brahman, it is not the totality of Brahman. One has to continue going through all these five entry points, through those first transcendences to deeper and deeper transcendences, until all of these merge into an essential transcendence where we know the Brahman in its highest station. And then from there we return through all those gradations and degrees all the way to the most material life, where we know Brahman in its most material, limited, fragmented expression in the material form of life. Then only do we know Brahman in his totality. So, such is the theme of the first part of the Kena Upanishad. And this last paragraph of the Sri Aurobindo's commentary we will study in greater detail next Sunday, where he discusses the way the Isha solves the problem of life and the way the Kena solves it. And this relationship between the two is very complementary, which we continue next Sunday. For now, we can briefly meditate on these verses.